How's it going, everyone? Today, I wanted to do kind of a quick 15-20 minute preview of looking at the top 15 quarterbacks for this year's fantasy season. And as I go through this, feel free to, leave any comments if you guys have any suggestions for me, whether you want me to go more in detail or um, make this a little bit longer of a video for future reference. But just for a little bit more info, I'll probably be releasing a wide receiver and a running back list too, so keep a lookout for that. But in the meantime, let's get it rolling with my quarterback list. Um, so as you can see, my number one guy is Aaron Rodgers, and I think this is pretty unanimous amongst all the analysts and amongst all the drafts that I've seen. Um, in terms of the position where I've seen him go in the third round, which I think is a decent spot for him. Anywhere between the second and the fourth round. Second if it's a reach, fourth if it's a steal. Um, and I'm not a big fan of taking a quarterback that early. I think you can get a really good value quarterback later on in the seventh, eighth round. But if there's a quarterback that you can make a case for, it is Rodgers because he's got those deadly weapons with Jordy, with Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams. Now they added Martellus. They've also got Ty Montgomery. And on top of that, he's also a pretty good runner of the football. He'll get you about 300 rushing yards. And then he's also good for a couple of rushing touchdowns, maybe three, four, five. And that running element is one of the main reasons that I personally have him above my number two guy, and that's Drew Brees. So everything that I said in terms of passing for Rodgers pretty much holds for Brees, except that Brees constantly puts up these ridiculous 5,000 yard plus seasons, and he is not slowing down, and I don't think he'll slow down. The guy is playing for a new contract, which means to me that he's going to go out and ball out. He's got weapons. He's got Mike Thomas. He's got Snead. They added Ted Ginn. He's got Ingram. They've got Adrian Peterson added. And I think with all those guys, he'll continue to do damage. And the fact that the Saints don't really have a defense means they'll always be playing catch up. So Drew Brees will put up numbers. Moving right along, number three, I've got Andrew Luck. And the reason I have him at number three is, for me, the potential. I know that he's kind of a lesser version of Aaron Rodgers to me when he stays healthy. That's the big thing for me. He does tend to have a lot of turnovers, but he's in a pretty weak division. If it wasn't for the Houston Texans, they're the one really good defensive team in that division. But he's usually good for over 4,000 yards passing. He's good for a couple hundred yards rushing, a couple rushing touchdowns. He's a pretty tough guy. Offensively, they've got weapons there. They've got Moncrief. They got Ty. They've got Doyle. Frank Gore is still there. So I think Luck is a pretty good option. And the reason I have him at three and not number four, if you see at four, I've got Brady. But for me, Brady is really getting up there in age, and that's one of the things that's just preventing me from putting him any higher. I do think he will have a great year, but the Patriots are just such a well-balanced team that not every single week do they need Brady to go out there and throw for 400 yards and three touchdowns and something like that. Um, Sometime it can be just the rushing attack, another time it can be defensively. So that's the reason I have Brady at such a little bit lower, just because that team is so well balanced and so good that he won't need to put up those kind of numbers all the time. Number five, I've got Matt Ryan, and I know that he's just coming off an MVP year, but the Falcons lost their coordinator. Um, for me, I think that'll be a big deal, and not only will the Falcons take a step back, but Ryan will also probably take a step back. Um, and I do think that a lot of his success is going to have to do with whether Julio is able to stay healthy or not. So if he stays healthy, I think he'll be fighting for that top five quarterback spot. If not, I could see him go outside the top five. And in addition to that, I do think there's something to say about the Super Bowl hangover. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons drop 2 or 3 more games than they had last year. At number 6, I've got Russell Wilson. And Wilson, I like what he can do with the Seahawks. I have him as a top 10 quarterback because, again, he brings that rushing capability in every single game. He's usually good for extending any play with his agility that he has. The division that the Seahawks are in is pretty weak, even though I do know the Seahawks usually get tough games from the Rams, from the Cardinals, and the 49ers even sometimes. But Russell Wilson does tend to explode from for at least a third of the season or one half of the season. For that reason, I do like him to be right around that top 5 range. At 7, I've got Big Ben, and some people might say, this is way too high for Ben. He's getting old. He had a lot of issues last year playing on the road versus at home. But for me, it's just a matter of all the talent that he has on offense. It's ridiculous to me. You've got Antonio Brown, who's the best receiver in football. You've got Martavius Bryant coming back, who at times 2 years ago outplayed Antonio Brown. He's still got Le'Veon Bell. It's ridiculous. So for that reason, and on top of that, that offensive line at Pittsburgh is pretty good. I think if Big Ben can stay healthy, he'll be a top 10 finish. At number 8, I've got Cam Newton, and this is a pretty shaky number 8. I think if everything goes right, this is around the spot where Cam finishes. The reason that I'm worried with the Panthers and with Cam is that offensive line is still a big question mark to me. The Panthers, that was one of the reasons why Cam didn't play well and why he got hurt. So on top of a questionable offensive line, he's coming back from shoulder surgery, which I don't know how he'll bounce back from. And he's been surrounded by all this talent, but it's all these small guys who he usually has trouble overthrowing. So I'm not sure. I don't think his accuracy will increase by any means. And on top of that, if you take away the running from him and try and turn him into a traditional kind of guy, I think he's actually more of a quarterback 2 kind of guy, which is what's being discussed, to be honest with you, from what I've heard online and through some of the reports on NFL and with the Panthers. At number 9, I've got Derek Carr, and I like Derek Carr. He's a young guy. He's on the come up. He finished last season off very strong. At one point, he was in the MVP consideration. He's getting Marshawn Lynch this year, so I think that'll help with the running game. The offensive line in Oakland is stellar, so that's always a plus. He's got Amari Cooper, one of the top-notch young receivers. Crabtree is still there. So they've got talent, and I think Derek Carr will be flirting with that top 10 finish for quarterbacks. At 10, I have Jameis Winston, and this is actually a guy that I think can have a breakout year. And if everything goes right, he could maybe even be a top 5 quarterback. And for those that say that this is really generous, I would say look at what he did last year. Mike Evans had a coming out party, and I fully expect him to continue with that. In addition, this year they had Deshaun Jackson, who's a burner, and he can still play. They've added O.J. Howard in the draft, who's going to be a steal for a tight end. And in addition, you add the rushing capabilities of Winston, and that, in my eyes, elevates him to a for sure top 10 talent. At 11, I've got Phil Rivers, and this guy's always been consistent. I know a lot of guys stash Phil Rivers as a quarterback, as a backup quarterback, or sometimes he might go undrafted. But I'm a fan of Phil Rivers. I think that the Chargers did a lot to add in terms of offensive help for Rivers. They went ahead and got him help in the first round of the draft for receiver. Keenan Allen is coming back. If he can stay healthy, that'll be a big help. They had the receivers step up from last year. Melvin Gordon hopefully will come back healthy. And for me, the main thing is if all those guys on offense stay healthy, um, the Chargers will have a pretty good offensive attack. My only concern is that their division is so good in defensively with the Chiefs and with the Broncos that there's going to be at least 4 games where Rivers is going to be struggling. At 12, I've got Kirk Cousins, and I know that the last couple of years he's been a pretty solid fantasy player, but there's a couple reasons why I have him at number 12. For me, I just don't see this guy as a superstar. And a lot of times when the Redskins have gotten points back and scored points is when they've already been out of games, and it's kind of just garbage time points. And I don't like relying personally on fantasy points in garbage time to win a game. On top of that, the Redskins lost so much talent with Garcon leaving, with Deshaun Jackson leaving, and the the health of Jordan Reed is always a big question mark for me. At 13, I've got Stafford, um, and I I could see Stafford finishing in the top 10, and there's arguments to be made for him in the top 10. I want to see him stay healthy, and if he does, he has the full capability to throw for 5,000 yards. My problem with the Lions is that a lot of games last year they were coming back from behind, and sometimes it was in low scoring affairs. So that doesn't usually translate to a lot of fantasy success. And the reason that they were in those situations is because Stafford is pretty prone to um, committing turnovers. So if he can stay healthy, and if everything clicks on offense for them, I could see a top 10 finish for Stafford. At 14, I've got Marcus Mariota. And to me, again, this is another guy that has a lot of potential. They added a lot of talent offensively in Tennessee. If DeMarco Murray can repeat the season he had, they added Decker. They added receivers in the draft. So there's a lot of talent on offense there. Mariota's also a great scrambler, and he's good for a couple hundred rushing yards. And he's still really young. Hopefully, he can come back from the injury that he had since he's young. And I could see him maybe pushing some guys to like a 6, 7 overall quarterback if everything goes well and the Titans play to their abilities. And finally, finishing off my list, I have Prescott. And I know a lot of people might have issues with him at 15, but for me, a lot of it comes down to the sophomore slump. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of the success that he's going to have is going to depend on the availability of Zeke. And I've read multiple reports that Zeke is facing at least 1 or 2 game suspension, which won't help Prescott. On top of that, if Dez isn't 100% healthy, that's also going to affect Dak. The one thing that he does have going for him is that he's playing against that. He's playing behind that stellar offensive line, so he will have more time to find open guys, and he will have more time to scramble. But that division in the NFC East is just so unpredictable that one year you can have the Cowboys completely dominated and then them finish in second or third place, and that's why I have them at 15. So with that, that's actually the end of my quarterback list. Let me know what you guys thought. Give me some reviews. Give me some comments. Feel free to like, to subscribe, and watch out for the next reviews that are going to be coming up in these days. Thanks.